Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, July 22nd, and this is the monthly meeting of the Phil Community Group. So glad to have everybody here. And those of you who are joining us later, we'll be talking about a lot of different things. And we have some very exciting things to share, including we're going to be starting off with some news from Ron about his advocacy work in Nevada. So, Michelle, did you have anything
No,
to
go
add
go
before then?
jump in, Ron. Tell us
All
what's
right.
going on. I mean, and also
Yeah.
we shared in the when I sent out the agenda, the link in the TESOL article that you had,
Oh
the
yeah.
very nice call out to your work with elementary students. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And just like if you go to my LinkedIn account, I had posted the link, there's a comment from one of the parents. So you have a
Oh, nice.
testimonial about Phil there and what he does
Oh,
for the
great.
families.
Go find that.
So yeah. So I've been involved in advocacy because I found that there were some laws in Nevada that undermine word language education. One of them has a misinformed definition. It says that a word language is any spoken language other than English. And first of all, that doesn't carry over actual more robust definition, but in particular, it disenfranchises deaf and hard of hearing people and deafblind people because it doesn't, by saying spoken, it excludes sign and tactile languages. And then the other issue is that the requirements to teach any language other than English is for the birds, right? The requirements to teach English as a second language is very robust. It's enshrined
Oh.
in the law, not just the administrative code. And to teach anything else is like, so long as you have a minor on the target language, you're good. And for ASL, it presents the false equivalency that being an interpreter qualifies you to teach. They're two different
Oh,
skills, right?
yeah.
So I've been trying to change that. I got a SNR involved. I happen to teach some of her kids. So she got the ball rolling, but it was late in the legislative session. Long story short, I've spoken with senators from both sides of the aisle here in Nevada. And finally, we have one senator who picked it up. I had a meeting on Monday and again has bipartisan support. And part of the reason I was able to do that was because of partnerships. You Somebody was mentioning that there should be, I think Tom, that there were people at that conference you went that were not just in education. It's the
Hmm.
same thing. I partner up with the Deaf Commission here in Nevada. Um, Katie Chubb, the executive director of the American Society for Deaf Children, helped me update my policy brief in a way that she has more experience in policy. So we streamlined it. It got picked up, and I'm very excited about that. But it's the result of partnerships to be able to move this forward. And there's even an opportunity to set a standard because now I started. Of course, I'm studying law now. I'm doing a master's in legal studies to help me with this stuff. And I found that across the states, there are similar issues. Most states don't even define what a word language is. And the reason that is significant is if that there were ever a case that went in front of a judge and there's no clear definition of a word language is, it could be whatever the judge thinks it means and how much research due diligence they do. And that can be very problematic. And I mean, I could go on, but when I finish my new white paper on the subject, I'll be sure to send it to you.
Yeah,
And
that's
then the other thing is I presented yesterday at Nell, and
great.
yeah, that went really well. And I talked about Phil as well, so a lot of people taking notes. It was really good to see that people knew the term. So
Oh,
we're
good.
getting out there. Yeah, people know what it is. They just didn't know it could be done at the elementary school level. And just I made sure to say, don't try this at home. You know, this is still a work in progress, but I'm here if you have any questions. Oh,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
that's great, Ron. Thank you.
Mhm.
And James, you had a comment?
I do actually, from my experience working in Nevada, I used to be the language coordinator down in Clark County, that tiny little bitty district there.
Yeah.
Um, One person, Ronald, you may want to talk to is Senator Scott Hammond. He used to be one of my Spanish teachers. So, and yeah, I believe he's still, yeah, looking at his website, it looks like he's still a senator. But yeah, he used to be a Spanish teacher out in, can't remember if it was Moapa Valley, one of our rural areas. But anyhow, um, sorry, I know he's a contact.
I'm having a
Um,
meeting right now.
one of the strange things, I,
Oh, Michelle, is that one of the
oh,
kids?
there you
I
go.
went ahead and muted.
So when I was there in Nevada is when we revised the standards way back when, and that's when everything changed from foreign language to world language, which that was a process as well. We had several of the legislators who thought that was just stupid, and I think if it had happened today, they would have said it was woke. But that's just why do you need to change it to world? Why can't it be foreign? And blah, 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 blah. But we did try to add in ASL at the time, and it was the people at CDE, or excuse me, CDE is Colorado, Nevada Department of Ed just did not want to add that at the time. And then another thing that I'll point out about licensure, it's not even if you have a minor, it's if you have X number of credit hours. And they don't even really look at what the courses are. They'll take 100, 200 level courses to certify you. So, for example, I had at one point, I think, 8 teachers there in Clark County that had gone on Mormon missions and to Spanish speaking countries. They had spent 2 years there. If you go on a mission and you come back and go to Brigham Young University or any of the campuses, they have a course called Spanish 315, and it's basically a review course for return missionaries. Because what happens is you come back after 2 years and you're at like an intermediate, mid, intermediate, high level, but you can only talk about church.
Hmm.
So, and their reading proficiency is not that high because they don't do a lot of reading. So they can't talk about going to a restaurant unless they were really in the country. But even then, they can talk about some basic stuff in church. Whereas if you did learn in a classroom setting, you would have possibly got some other themes in there. So the whole purpose of the course is to expand your vocabulary. Well, towards the end of the semester, you can go down to the testing center. You pay $50 and you take their credit by exam, and you can get credit for the 100, all the 100, which are 8 credits each, and the 200, which are another 8 credits. And then that Spanish 315 is 3 credits. So you've got 16, 19 credits. And oh, wait, no, what was it? They gave you more credits than that. But anyhow, basically, what a lot of these people did is like a lot of them were social studies and math majors. They took that one Spanish class and then the credit by exams. And when they moved to Nevada, that counts. So it was one course that was a grammar and vocabulary review course. We I don't think we wrote anything. We certainly didn't learn. I mean, I look at what I did as a major at BYU, and I had to take 2 literature courses, 2 linguistics courses, methodology, all these other things. And nope, they had been on missions and took one class. So I had a lot of teachers in there doing those transformation drills all day long. That
Wow.
was
Well,
the,
thank you. Thank you
yeah.
for that. So I'd definitely like to follow up with you. I put my LinkedIn information so we connect because we're in the process. We're supposed to update the standards, and so definitely would like to talk to you. What is the name? I don't want to take all the time here. What is the name of the senator?
It's Scott Hammond, Hammond.
Okay. All right. I'll reach out to him. Thank you so much. Do
You're
reach out
welcome.
to me on LinkedIn, and we need to talk. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we'll do. Yeah.
Good. Well, those two things are connected because one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking, Ron, was the importance of connections and relationships. And James has just reinforced that. The fact that one of his former Spanish teachers is a state senator where you're trying to work on these very issues. Those things don't happen by accident. We have to be very conscientious about cultivating those relationships. So, yeah, the more folks we can hook up with, the better.
Yeah, and I think it's important, especially in the context of Phil, in order to move forward, like what I'm doing, from what I read, Ryan is doing. Even though the The teacher is a facilitator. He's still a teacher, especially a language teacher. So by fixing those issues at, have the protection of a statute that is passed by a legislature, it sets things up so that things like Phil can take hold and actually work. Otherwise, you're going to end up, and I've heard in these meetings, a lot of people are concerned about that. It's like, okay, it could just be anybody who's going to supervise kids while they're looking at their phone. No, we need to treat it seriously and make those partnerships, because for the deaf community, a lot of the cases that go in front of a judge are under ADA. But one of the things I discovered while doing my research in law school is that they don't fall under the Civil Rights Act, because all the decisions regarding language, discriminating against somebody because of their language, is tied to nation of origin. So if you're an American whose primary language is ASL, you don't fall neatly there. And the argument could be, well, they're protected under ADA. So the problem with ADA is that they treat ASL not as a language, but as an accommodation, which is not, it's a language. So to really prove the point, if you had an immigrant whose primary language is Mexican Sign Language, they would be neatly protected under ADA and the Civil Rights Act. But an American whose primary language is ASL would not. Part of the reason is the law was written by hearing people, right? It's not just because we created categories doesn't mean it's perfect. So there's a lot more to pull from, but if at least everybody can agree on what it means, that's a good starting point. And right now, the whole issue with world languages, personally, I would just call it human languages. That's how I present it to my students, as human language versus animal languages or electronic languages, because the entire reasoning behind changing from foreign language to world languages was simply the acknowledgement that not everybody in this country has English as their native language. That's it. But the way it's, for example, even in the standards, it says, well, Paiute, Spanish, and ASL are not native to Nevada. I said, well, that's true, but states don't learn languages. People do. And when you look at the different, like Florida and California and a few other states where they have actually provided a definition, the common denominator is what they mean by world language is for the purpose of education, any language that is not English. So you have three different definitions that answer three different questions: foreign to who, foreign to where, or foreign to what language.
Yeah.
We need to get on the same page.
That's important work. Michelle, you are muted.
But unmute. Okay. Yeah, no, I like that idea of human languages because it's interesting. I mean, already for some years, we've been fighting this move to say that, we don't, in place of a world language, you could learn a computer language, like how to code, a coding basically. And that is not the same thing at all. Although knowing languages, having been a computer programmer myself, was a help in learning how to code, but it's really two separate things, and the reasons for doing them are also very different. But now with AI as well, when we call them human languages, then we are really emphasizing the humanity of it, the connections of people to people, and things that people have done in the past, like things they've written in their histories and their cultural things that we continue to learn from, how they speak to us, even though they were from the past. And as well as we think about what are the foundations we're building going forward, so that, our children and their children will have lives that are still rich with human connections, no matter how many things are being done by computers or AI or other things by that time. We have a neighbor that has just brought over for the second time in 2 weeks half loaf of bread that he baked. And there's just no comparison, a loaf of bread that somebody baked in their kitchen and brings to you, as opposed to just like pulling that mass-produced bread off the shelf. And there's a place for that mass-produced, because sometimes you just need a large quantity of it and so on. But I hope that we as human beings don't lose sight of how much that the things that are actually done by human beings for human beings, how much those things mean, language being a big one.
All right.
So, Joy, I wonder if Joy has any updates you want to share right now. I know you guys are gearing up for the Community-Based Heritage Language Conference at the beginning of October. I'll be there.
We are. Good. Yay. We are. No, I want to hear about what Tom was going to tell us about the conference because I have to leave at 7.
Oh, God,
So
sorry.
I want to
Didn't
hear
put
as
that-
much as possible. Tom, you don't have to do that in 10 minutes, but I want to hear as much as I can. Okay. Thank
Well,
you.
as I mentioned to begin with, one of the most remarkable things about the conference was, first of all, the setting. I mean, very inspirational to be in Florence, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But then also the fact that it was folks from around the world, not all language people, only maybe 25%, and primarily higher ed. So it was really pretty remarkable in that way. Now, what was interesting was every single session, and I can't remember how many there were, but every single session, if the presenter had given permission, was recorded. And they recorded both the slides, because they demanded that we have PowerPoint slides, and also the speaker themselves. So, Michelle, maybe could you put those in the chat,
They are,
perhaps?
yeah, I
Okay.
can. They're on our Phil community Google
Ah,
Docs. So I
good.
was going to put that
Okay.
link so you can just go directly to do that. But I'll also just while you're talking, share that one so that people can just see where they can go find the links. Because the cool thing is that we can go watch your presentation now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I ended up actually doing two presentations. One was my regular presentation, and then the other one was the closing remarks for the conference. So I was able to do that and share some of the insights that I'd had, which for me helped me summarize. But I want to probably give you the view that I had and how this relates to Phil by sharing with you the two works of art in the museum in the Uffizi that I visited. And so the first one, let me see if I can pull this up. And the point here that I'm trying to make is that the Middle Ages and the Renaissance were so distinctively different that the Renaissance was not the Middle Ages 2.0. And if you look at the time from the fall of Rome, and actually even before in terms of some of the art, up until the Renaissance, there were some really standard things that they were doing. So, for instance, in this famous picture by Giotto, an Italian artist, you can see that he was trying to work a little bit with perspective, but because you'll notice the way he's done this here in the lower right or on the right hand side, you have the saints kind of one behind the other. So you can tell that there was some depth there, but basically it's flat. These maybe are recognizable people, maybe not. But then what was really amazing was to go to the next room, and I'll pull that up because the very next room, after you are looking at one of the masters of the Middle Ages, and that was an incredible work. The very next room you walk into, you see this. And all of a sudden, all of the themes are changed. These are people with depth. It's a real story going on here. It's not biblical, it's related to mythology. And so the point for me was, you know what? When it came to the Renaissance, the people in Florence had to develop new structures to be able to support what they were doing. The old structures, all the old givens that had served them quite well for hundreds of years, were no longer sufficient to be able to communicate what they were trying to communicate. And for me, as you'll see, particularly in my closing remarks, if you look at those, is the idea that we have the opportunity now with AI to change the basic structures. Because what we've had up to this time, which served us moderately well in the industrial age, was very much a school focused idea, a school centric idea for how learning occurs. You take group of diverse kids, you bring them to a common place, you put them groups of 25 or 35, more than that perhaps in Nevada, with a single teacher and you have certain outcomes you expect. Now, we know that they didn't always happen, right? Or very frequently they didn't happen. But that was what we had, and we did that as well with as much effort as we possibly could. But now what we have is the ability with AI to transition away from that school-centric focus to a learner-centric focus. So when you think about what Ryan's doing, and Ryan is so brilliant in what he does, I don't want to steal his thunder, but when you think about what Ryan's doing, he's showing in a very definite way how you can use AI to make each individual's learning path unique and responsive to him or her alone. And that's just completely different because now we no longer have the need for Spanish 1, French 2, German 3, right? Instead, I think world languages is way ahead of the game, but we've traded that course structure in for the possibility of learning based on the proficiency guidelines and levels of proficiency. And proficiency only resides with the individual learner. Proficiency does not reside in a classroom. Nobody can have an intermediate low classroom of Spanish. You can't do that because proficiency belongs to the individual learner. So it's very exciting for me to think about the way Phil, and particularly the way you practitioners are really working with this now. It's the way that Phil responds to the individual learner. So Ryan, instead of saying, hey, the school offers Spanish, so if you want to take a foreign, a world, a human language, you're going to take Spanish because that's what the school offers for very good reasons. I understand those. Now he can instead say to the individual learner, hey, what language do you want to learn? Because I can help you learn that. My job is no longer teaching German 2. My job is to help you increase your proficiency in the language of your choice at the rate that you is right for you and to the level that you've targeted. So you don't fail because you don't get to advanced low and pass the AP language exam. That's not a bad thing. If you're Rick Steves, and I use this example quite often, if you're Rick Steves, I it would have been a terrible travesty to make Rick Steves go through AP French when really what he wanted to do was to get to intermediate low or maybe even novice high in 5 languages or 6 languages. And you say, hey, you know what? We couldn't do that with a school structure. We can make that happen for you now because, as Ryan will say, he's got kids layering languages. Joy, was that a wave or did you want to make a comment? And I'll stop and
I was waving. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. And I'll watch the recording. I get to see.
Thanks
Okay,
for
they're
joining us.
only
And be sure
20
to go
minutes
check
long.
the
What?
They're only 20 minutes long, so they don't take too long.
recordings from the conference.
Yeah.
The links I just showed you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
and you
great.
can watch
Okay,
the
I've
actual
got you.
presentations.
Okay, thank you. See you next time.
See
Okay.
you next time. Bye.
Any comments or feedbacks or ideas? And I get so comfortable with our community here and with the neural network that I sometimes I know I get way out, in the far reaches, and I'm willing to own that. And I'm willing to say, you know what, I don't have anything to lose by being willing to say, listen, there is a different way for us to help kids learn languages besides having them respond to instruction in a group.
Well, it makes me think of something that I don't know, held as a, little personal thought up here in my head over the years is, yeah, the whole idea of Spanish 1, Spanish 2, Spanish 3. I have a teacher this year that gave the stamp test to her Spanish 1 students, and we just in that class we did the reading and the writing.
Mhm.
He was already showing intermediate level, and I
Yeah,
said,
so are
well,
you going to keep him in Spanish 2 next year?
but he'll miss the vocabulary from,
Oh,
yeah.
oh.
And I'm like, but he's clearly showing us he can perform in that class. He can pick up that vocabulary at any time. But I said, is the vocabulary he's going to miss from level 2 going to keep him from being successful? Well, no, let's move him.
So, and James, this is where I am really trying to, along with Michelle and everybody else in our group, trying to really explore the structural hows to enable that to happen. Because I know it's fine for me to sit here in Chicago and say, oh yeah, don't put that kid in Spanish 2 next year. He deserves an opportunity to learn in a Phil type of environment. But then the school says, well, we don't have anything like that, right? So I think that there are some possible solutions,
Mm,
but those are what we really are interested in trying to help you explore, your teachers explore, the other teachers that we've talked to from around the country who are beginning to experiment with Phil. Um, can I ask you what the plan is for that student for next year?
Um, I, I'm still in the working things out how, because, every district has its own logistics and you've got to convince people if it's, you know, we're not going to put X number of grades in the grade book every
Yeah,
week. How are we
yeah,
going to give them
yeah.
credit? That kind of stuff. So I have to negotiate that. So I've got a couple things. We've got one school that is they've got innovation status and everything they do is project-based learning. And they've got a lady there who's from Korea and she's about to get her license in Korean because she finally fought with the Department of Ed because on her transcripts from Korea there's nowhere on there showing how that she took courses to learn Korean when she was in college. I know none of you have heard of stuff like that before. It
Yeah.
only happens to me.
Old
But
story.
yeah, it's like her transcripts in Korean. But anyhow, so we've talked about how is she going to teach the class because they don't do like a full year kind of a thing. And this is what she's going to be one of my guinea pigs. Another thing that I'm trying to do to convince people, I've decided to do a professional development course that way. And I'm going to tell teachers, do you want to earn 15 hours, 30 hours, 45 or 60? Oh, you want to do 60? Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to spend your 60 hours? Oh, you're going to watch this webinar and you're going to read these articles and you're going to go do this and you're going to go do that. And, I'll share resources with them and ideas. But, if this teacher finds this book that he wants to read and that's how he's going to fill his time, okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's some of those little things that are going to build us
Some
towards
leadership in defining what you want to do. Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting. During COVID, when ACTFL had to go virtual, one of the things we offered through Washington State, through our WAFL, Washington Association for Language Teaching, was that teachers, we could give them clock hours for things that they did, but they had to, I asked them to, to uh, write just briefly some main point from the things that they did. But, because they could watch them on demand at different times, they some of them watched a lot, especially some of the newer teachers that were really wanting more professional development, a lot of our Chinese teachers, for example. And for a lot of our teachers who are not native speakers of English, they loved the opportunity to watch the recordings because they could stop them, they could repeat them, they could hear. And, for me, it was almost a shock when I went back to an in-person conference because, like, oh my gosh, like the speaker's way over there. We're all back here. We can't really hear clearly. What did they say? And then, oh, it's not recorded. I can't go back and listen to it and everything. So,
Not
we
to
love to
mention
have the
cost.
opportunity to meet in person, but I love the fact that each, like you're describing, each person can describe. I'm going to go to like 2 sessions and I'll get, whatever it was, 2 credits or 2 clock hours or something. We use clock hours for continuing education. Anyway, I love that idea of making it variable so people really get accountable for what they want to do and figuring out how to get it done.
Yep.
James, one of the things that I might suggest, and I'd be happy to brainstorm with you about this, is what guiding principle number 2 is transparency of expectations. So you want to make sure that their expectations are tied to their goals, which are tied to some sort of proficiency. And we haven't talked a whole lot about AI, and I know you and Carl have had some conversations about it. But what I have done that I think is at least one step in that direction is I've gone into Chat or Gemini or Claude or one of the other ones that I use quite frequently that knows the actual proficiency guideline and scales and the can do statements. And I've been able to say, okay, using those as a model, I'm working with, X group, teachers or students or whatever, and I want to be able to have their experience personalized in the way that is right for them. So help me come up with a proficiency scale going from novice low all the way up. I wouldn't go past advanced low or maybe intermediate high, that would help them see what their goals could be, and then also set up a set of corresponding can do statements. Now, I don't know if you've tried anything like that, but it's like, okay, 15
I
seconds go by and
I
I've got it.
actually haven't, but you're making me think that, like, you can put all that into like a Google Notebook, or is that what I'm calling it, Google Notebook? But
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, that's their new name now. Mhm.
And then I can share that, we can share that with students and they go in and, yeah, put the 2 documents in there and some other resources, and it's going to, reference all that and say, yeah, these should be your can do statements of things and that's how we can map out that year.
Yeah. And it gets you away from a couple of things. It gets you away from clock hours because we know those don't really correspond to learning.
Yeah.
And the second thing it does is it gives them very definite targets that they know about. And so then when it comes to that sticky thing of grading, you're not saying, well, how many videos did you watch? You're saying, what can you do with the Korean you're learning, and what level does that connect to? And then you set up ahead of time that, hey, listen, if you reach novice mid in 3 of the 5 areas that we have defined, then that would be equivalent to an A or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, and then, I've got that also can answer the question of, like, here I've got enough heritage speakers of Spanish. We've got our own courses,
Yeah.
but not everywhere can do that. Maybe you have the 3. Well, what do you do with them? Sit them in Spanish 1 and they're learning the colors.
Yeah.
So, and then you get the teachers, well, I'm going to have them independent study, but it's not structured at all. This adds some kind of a structure that that can actually get the kid to learn something instead of wasting their time for a whole year. What I
Yeah.
love is
Especially,
I love when they tell them, well, just have those kids teach the class. That's not their job. That's not what they're there for.
yeah, no. I especially like it because by setting out those transparent expectations, especially for a kid, their value for a course comes from the grade, right? So when you have those clearly tied, then you could say, listen, you as a heritage speaker can sit in this class for a semester or a year and get a credit, or you can switch to a fill approach. You can look at what the defined expectations are for, if you are successful with these things at this level, that's the equivalent of 2 credits or 2 courses. And if you want to do that in 1 year, go for it. That's what I'm here for as your facilitator. So it completely redefines, and I guess that's where I'll go back to the whole idea of switching from the Middle Ages and not letting the use of AI be a Middle Ages 2.0 experience. AI can help translate this and transform it into a renaissance in language learning.
Well, and I'm thinking too, like we've got a kid who because he went through immersion, we, we're starting our first immersion in August, but he went through a charter school, K-8. And then when he went to the high school, they were going to put him in French 1. We advocated to get him put into a higher class, but he took the AP exam this year as a junior and already passed it. So what's he going to take next year? So again, I've worked with people. He's going to go take a 3,000 level course at one of the local colleges. Our district's going to pay the tuition and so forth. But here's the thing: is he wants to major in what's it, zoology.
Yeah.
He's been working, as a volunteer internship something over at the Denver Zoo here, and he wants to go work on the safaris in Africa. Well, he's gonna encounter French there. Well, Bill would be a perfect opportunity let's learn some zoology in French, because I couldn't teach a class like that in Spanish, but I could certainly help him find stuff for that.
Yeah, and help him design that. And once again, I know there's a lot of debate about Phil and AI, and I respect that. But with something like that, because you're also never, I will guarantee you are never going to have enough French students who are interested in zoology to be able to offer French for zoology, kids interested in zoology. But instead, you can do like Ryan did with the Korean student and say, hey, you like K-pop? All of the Korean that you're learning, you may learn through the lens of K-pop or whatever it is, zoology, or
Video games. Yeah.
yeah, that's where I get really excited. Ron, I know
Ronald
you
said
had,
his, yeah.
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 Yeah, and I want to add to what you guys are talking about. Take the example of the kid who wants to study zoology. How about the kid who wants to go into medicine, or wants to go into biology or other type of medical things? I tell the students the story, how they can apply this, because one of the advantages of film, or at least the way I do it, my students can switch languages every semester. That way they have enough time, and maybe they make friends with somebody who draws them into a different language. But what I've noticed is they develop their meta-linguistic skills, which I talked about a couple sessions ago. And that becomes very important if you are a healthcare worker going into a remote area in Africa or South America, where people speak a different language that doesn't have a writing system, and they have not had enough exposure to civilization to have words for things like vaccine or injection, right? There are documented people who talk about this. How do you convey that idea in their language when they don't have the background knowledge for this, right? So if you want to talk about antibodies, maybe you use to borrow the word for warrior or something like that, and try to create that image in the language. So it's not just about learning a language; it's just about negotiating meaning in the world, right? And so, and not, we don't have everything figured out yet. So again, and even for a regular language program where they're just taking Spanish or French or whatever, that's part of the benefit of learning more than one language, is that you can develop that skill. So that's another angle to throw there.
And we've had this bias in this country in traditional language programs that you do one language at a time, right? And part of that is because of the school centric focus where we can't put
Number
you
of periods.
in 2 periods of language class. But with a Phil approach, with those clearly defined targets, with clearly defined independent assessments, you can say, hey, if you're already at AP level in French, why don't you add on another 2 more Romance languages to start with? Because you're going to pick those up quickly, especially if you can do it through the lens of what you are interested in. So learn all your Spanish through zoology, right?
Mhm.
Or mathematics or the social
And then,
sciences, whatever it
well,
might
then
be.
that adds to that motivation factor. I'm learning this skill, but through the lens of what excites me. And I can't do that for everybody in the classroom. I can't walk in and have a lesson that everyone's going to go, that's what I wanted to learn. No, but I could help them do it all individually. So,
Right now, we're limited to being excited about our language journey and what it's revealed to us. And we hope that that spreads to the students. But it's a totally different ballgame when you can respect them enough to say, the reason that you want to learn a language is important enough for me to help you learn that language or to help you discover a reason. But yeah, it's such a different ball game. But like I said earlier, I have trouble figuring out effective ways to communicate that to folks for whom I drew the parallel, and Michelle has heard this a couple of times now. I drew the parallel because of my experience in Florence with looking at a geocentric view of the universe where they were convinced for you know eons that everything revolved around the earth. They couldn't imagine anything different. And then Copernicus was able to set up the research basis for no, it's the sun that has to be in the center, but people still couldn't believe it because they couldn't see it. And then along came Galileo, who gave us telescopes, and all of a sudden, people are seeing rotations around the sun rather than, or other bodies like Venus's moons. That was the first one. Venus's moons circulating around Venus. And they realized, oh, that theory doesn't hold up anymore. I can see that. And there were still a whole host of people who said, oh, yeah, well, Copernicus may be right, but it must be that Venus moons rotate around Venus, but everything else rotates around the Earth. So they would bring it back into what they knew. It just happened to be wrong.
yeah.
And nothing could change that. And, I just think the way we have done language learning has been wrong. I don't say that. I mean, I try not to say it that way to too many people, but it's not been the best, most effective way for learners to achieve success in language learning.
Well, it all goes back to what is it Maya Angelou that says that once we know better, we do better. You know,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
Let's hope
you
so.
know, we're not terrible because I mean, you know, I learned from the grammar translation method, but I'm weird and I like the grammar and I like all those rules. But of all the kids sitting in Spanish one the year I was in Spanish one, how many of them are sitting in a role like I have with the background and the proficiency of Spanish? Probably just me,
Yeah.
you know.
And I want to say, talking about motivation, that's one of the things I emphasize when I talk to parents. Like some parents have challenged me. It's like, why is my kid learning Greek? They should be learning Spanish. And what I explain to them is like, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for Spanish. It's them a week and a half. What matters is that they learn how to learn a second language. And the best way to do that is like they choose it. And the backup that I use is Dornier's model for motivation. research. He identified three things. It's been recently challenged because it's not properly articulated, but I can tell you, at least in practice, it holds. One of them is like ideal self. Like my kids who, like you said, K-pop and manga and so on, they idealize themselves in that they want to be able to understand and see themselves in that universe. That's their motivation. My very close second to Spanish are Japanese and Korean. That's what my students are learning for the most part. Another one is the ought to self. Here in Las Vegas, and James, you know this, we have like we're the ninth island, right? So we have a large population of people from Hawaii. Almost every single kid, when given the choice, that's the language they choose. They feel obligated to learn it. Same thing with Filipino kids and uh, Jewish kids and Muslim kids. They want to learn Hebrew because they feel
Yeah.
obligated. That's my religion. And same thing with um, uh, Arabic.
Arabic.
And then
Mhm.
the third one that he mentioned, and the one that he got criticized the most, was like the learning experience. And in my case, in elementary school, it has to be a fun experience, right? And I'm not saying fun as in entertaining, but engaging as much as the brain as possible. That's where music and arts integration comes in, and movement and so on, but also welcoming the languages that are already present in the classroom. So when I say the way you say Spanish is good morning in Spanish is buenos dias, the Brazilian girl say, oh, that sounds like Portuguese. So okay, so tell everybody how you say it in Portuguese. Bom dia. Everybody say bom dia. So now we just like put it in the mouth of everybody in the classroom. And that just starts creating that synergy, starts normalizing it. The kids that speak a different language at home are seen. So now they're walking around like they are, they're somebody because they're the one who contributed that to the class. But those three elements of motivation are, and when I explain that to the kids themselves and the parents and the teachers, that seems to come across because there's nothing worse than having an unmotivated student. Here you are, you're supposed to have by these lesson plans, and it's like it's impossible. And when it comes to and everybody has to learn math and history and all that, but when it comes to language, why not give them a choice, right?
Well, we can't in the school-centric model. We
No,
just
no, we
can't
can't.
give them a
We
choice.
have to change the thinking.
Although he's not known as any sort of educational researcher, there's a guy named Dan Pink that 25 years ago now probably wrote a book called Drive, The Science of Human Motivation. And he identified four characteristics that related to autonomy. And it was control over time, team, task, and technique. And it's Phil, you've got all four of those essential ingredients that can help motivate and keep motivating a learner.
Well, there's one other thing that we had put into, or a couple other things maybe that we had included in the agenda, or it's in the Phil community Google Doc. But I was very excited that having continued this exploration of our Phil guiding principles and the three overarching: centering the learner, reimagining the teacher role, and building the learning ecosystem. I published this one about reimagining the teacher role. This is the AI graphic. You can kind of see centering the learner in the middle, but the reimagining the teacher role, really kind of seeing how to rethink what you're doing and so on. So I had a few thoughts about the principles that we'd outlined here: flexible consistency through co-design structures, continuous revision, and responsiveness, and so on. But anyway, I asked Tom and Brian if they had any feedback or ideas for it. So I got a couple of quotes from them. But then Ryan provided this amazing response in his email about things that came out of the experience of being in Florence with Tom there, in particular, learning about this concept of interdemocracy. I thought that was really an interesting concept. So I just put his whole thing in as a guest post. So I do encourage you to go read that. There they are in Florence. And I think this is a good time for us to be thinking about what does it mean about the responsibility of a teacher in really when you think about it, you have some responsibility in any learning teaching situation, but in particular in the kind of environment we envision with Phil, it's a different kind of role because we want to make sure that the students are owning responsibility for their own learning too. But the responsibility, you could say, of the teacher facilitator is to make sure they can successfully do that, take that responsibility, and know what it means to take responsibility, and also what it means to enjoy the success that you feel when you've done that. So things about learner agency and so on. But this a lot of things here that I think are really good. And this whole idea of shifting, he said, shifting from a traditional world language teacher to a Phil facilitator has made me a language learner once again. Rather than serving as the most proficient user of a single target language, I now find myself a novice in as many as a dozen languages at once. And in many ways, my students have become my teachers. And so that idea, that kind of reciprocal idea of the teacher is the learner and the learner is the teacher. I think to create that environment is not only that we're going to be more successful at achieving the goals of developing language proficiency in the people that come into our circle that happen to be called students or learners, but that we're also going to just enhance those human relationships, which I think we've been talking about that more and more, that, this is not a time to say, hey, AI is going to do everything. And so we can just be blobs or sit and watch television or something, because the human beings won't need to translate. They won't need to read books. They won't need to do all these different things. On the contrary, we will choose to do those things. We will do them because we can do them. And so how do we create that environment where we are choosing to do those things, not because the environment is making us do those things, but because that is the greatest human characteristic, is having choice, is taking on your own life in a sense. But anyway, I just wanted to share those couple posts. In particular, definitely go read Ryan's thinking about that. And I would love to invite you guys to also be a guest poster for me, and maybe just reflect on, the ideas you've been expressing today, for example. And Ronald, I know you've done a lot of that. So think about that in that setting. I've gotten quotes from you before for once, but it's time for some more, I think.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. I actually responded to your latest post
Okay,
because
great.
everything Ryan said was just like everything checked.
Yeah.
And what you just read, that's for a language nerd. I'm in paradise. I'm like, remember last time I said that the next logical step for me is to go to work at the university for a number of logistical reasons. I need to drag Phil with me so I can get my fix of being immersed in languages.
Yes, yeah,
So yeah.
definitely. Yeah. Well, and actually, I'm going to be having some more things with Russ Hugo at the University of Washington, who did his Phil class. And that was kind of what he experienced, is that, I mean, he's kind of one of those people that if he could go this far, he'll go that far. And so he put in a lot of time to support the individual students that were in the Phil class, but he enjoyed it so much, and he got so much out of that challenge of figuring out how to make sense of the goals that the learners had. I mean, they're adult learners, probably graduate students even, so it's not like they're just children or something, but how to support them in getting resources, how to have insight, because as somebody who had a PhD in linguistics and all, he has maybe some insight into language as a language that the person learning the language might not be bringing with them, because they've maybe learned some other languages, but they haven't really thought about, oh, this is how this kind of thing is pronounced, or this is how that structure works, or when people write this way, that's indicative of this kind of, like, for example, some languages have a different form for how you describe something that you did not witness. So to say something happened in the past, there's one way to say it where it says, I saw it, versus I understand that it happened. Supposedly it happened, that kind of thing. But in any case, I just wanted to share that. Let's continue this conversation. And actually, the next principle that I'm going to be tackling is the ecosystem. And that's where we really think of not like just resources and books and grammar lectures or videos or that kind of stuff, but what is it, the ecosystem? What causes things to grow and support each other? And so I'd love to have your ideas about those things too. So I think we're at 7:30.
Yeah, apologies. Ryan somehow had the idea that it was starting at 7:30.
Oh,
And he had texted me probably while I was off on one of my diatribes, And I didn't see it until just a few minutes ago. So I thought he might show up about 5 or 10 minutes ago, but I
Well,
guess not.
there's next time. There's always a
Yeah.
next time. So we'll look forward to
Right.
seeing you at the next one, and enjoy the rest of the summer.
And I will speak for Michelle when I say, first of all, thank you for coming and joining us. And second thing is, if you have suggestions about, you know what, here's something very specific that I'd like the community to talk about, let Michelle know and she'll just add it to the agenda. Or are the agendas open that they could add it themselves,
No,
or do
I
they
mean, we
need
don't have
to?
a place for them to edit, but I think just through
Okay.
communications would be the
Yeah.
best thing.
Yeah. Because that's why we have these community meetings. It's for you all.
Yeah, we're just kind of open-ended, but we probably will also, we could do some planned things where it's not just the informal community, but like, maybe more specifically talking about, say, building upon, maybe having people watch your presentations from Florence, and then you and Ryan have kind of a conversation about that, and where
Yeah.
people, having watched them, can also pursue ideas from that. That might be a workable thing to do. So maybe that's a
Yeah.
good idea for be able to finally rein him in and get him to
Yeah.
go through that a little bit. But anyway, I think I'm going to go leave and take care of the grandkids, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you
All
all.
right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tom.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.